Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss situation in Ukraine on the 7th of July. Today we have a lot of interesting news, so let's start. And of course the most important and the most interesting update is that according to the Russian sources, the Russian Tsar has dismissed the Prime Minister of the Great Britain. It's according to the Russian sources. But if we're talking about the military events, there are two events, and I think that if we're talking about some kind of media victory, we heard and we saw that the Ukrainians managed to establish their flag on the Snake Island. There was a lot of photo and videos. We discussed this situation many times. I told you that I think that Ukrainians would try to cross this sea to establish their flag, just to make photo, and as soon as they manage to do this, they will try to escape this area as fast as possible. Because as soon as the Ukrainians establish their flag there, the Russians, of course, they attack this area with the rockets from the sea. I haven't seen any pictures of this flag after the rocket attack. Maybe the flag is still there, maybe not, but as I understand, for now, there is nobody who can control or to hold this area for a very long time, because this island is under crossfire between two sides, and Ukrainians are able to destroy anything on this island. The Russians are able to do this as well. Another important thing about the flag, of course, that the Russians put their flag in Belogorovka, in this town. If you take a look at the West Sources map, you see that this town is considered as the town under the Russians, under the Ukrainian control. But as we discussed in my previous video, I think that the West Sources map, they did a mistake, and they were talking about this Belogorovka that located on the Road of Life that connected Solidar and in previous with the Lysychansk coal refinery, and that Ukrainians managed to return this town, because if you take a look at the Russian sources map, you see that this town is under the Russians, and there was a video that the Russians managed to put their flag on this territory. If we're talking about other events on the front line, we can say that the front line is stable. Not because of the fact that there is no clashes. There are very heavy clashes. As we discussed, the Russians, they reached the second defense line on the line of Siversk, Krasnogorsk, Solidar, Bakhmut, and there are very heavy clashes there. We discussed about the fact that the Russians took Sporne. This Russian source map has been updated. And the question is not about the projections that we discussed yesterday. If you remember, there was three types of projections according to this situation. At least we discussed three of them. The main idea and the main situation about projection is not the projection itself, but preparation. For example, I understand and we understand, we know that Ukrainians, of course, they're preparing themselves for another phase of the Russians' offensive operation. And of course, if the British intelligence and the US intelligence project something, it doesn't mean that they're just saying something in loud. Of course, it's some kind of instructions for the Ukrainians how they need to protect themselves, where they need to protect themselves, and where they should expect the main strike and main attack. So the yesterday's projections is some type of instruction for preparation. And I was waiting for one update for a very long time, and this morning, as I understand, because I checked this map yesterday, there was no update about this situation, but this morning I opened another interesting map that shows the location of forces, and this map has been updated. This one, and this map shows us the location of forces, and according to this update, it just like update on the 3rd of July. So it's the freshest update about this situation on the front lines. As you can see, the front line is almost the same as we can see now. The only difference in this front line, by the way, as you can see, this front line shows that Klinova is under the Russians. It's like the most fresh update about this. The only difference between the current situation is the town Sporne. This one is on the Russians, but this town map shows that this town is on the Ukrainians. So this is the location of Ukrainian forces and the Russian forces in this area, and we will discuss the sites, the three attack offensive lines of the Russians according to our projections that we discussed yesterday, and we will try to understand what are the forces in this region are planning to do. And so let's start. And of course we will start from the Siversk, this one. If we take a look at this map from the global scope, you see that Seversk, this area between Slaviansk, Konstantinovka, Bakhmut, and on this map it calls like Artyomovsk. It is its previous past name before 2014, but after the first conflict this town was renamed, and now it has the name of Bakhmut. And Seversk, this square. And as you can see, there are a lot of forces. And if you remember, a few videos ago, I told you that the Ukrainians pushed here around 20,000 soldiers. As you can see, if we're talking about Artyomovsk or Bakhmut, you see that there are less forces on the south than we see on the north near Seversk. And the same situation we can talk about Slaviansk, that there are forces, of course, around Slaviansk, but there are not so much forces, not so big number of forces that we can see near Seversk. So the information about 20,000 soldiers around Siversk, I must say that we can say that this map can confirm this information. Of course, I'm not saying that this map is 100% accurate about the situation with the forces on the front line, but we can say that we can use this map because there are a lot of open source information about this location of the forces, and we can say that this map is the most accurate. Maybe there are a lot of other sources, of course, but we have just these sources, and I see and I check this information from my source that this information is very accurate, and it's very close to the real situation. So let's talk about Siversk, and as we see, and according to the Ukrainian understanding of the situation, we see that the Ukrainians they understand that the most powerful strike the Russians are planning to do in direction of Seversk. So that's why they have a lot of forces in this area. So let's discuss who are going to protect and who are going to defend the Ukrainians in this area. Who is on the zero? You know that when the soldiers, you're asking him where were you fighting, on which side, like of the front line, and then usually if you hear that I was on the zero, so that's mean that he was on the front line, like 0 kilometers from the front line. So I was on the 0. That means that you're like in the very hell on the front line. So let's see and try to understand who is on the 0 position from the Ukrainian side. As you can see, there are like 5 marks here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one. And we know that these forces that located between Berestova and Sporne was already defeated. Sporne has fallen. So, and let's take a look who was there. And according to this information, it's just a territorial defense brigade. So we understand maybe this is the reason why these forces retreated so fast from Sporne, because that it's not like a regular army, it's a territory defense. And as far as I see, they're from Cherkasy. They're from the West Ukraine. But these forces was supported by this one, is Ukrainian Volunteer Corps. These forces, according to the information internet, it's the most trained forces. So that's why, and these forces, as you can see, they're protected Ivana, Daryevka and Vyimka. So the Ukrainians decided to put the most trained forces on the most important line of Russian attack. If you take a look at the West Sources map, we discussed that the most valuable attack is from Sporne, Ivan, Daryevka, Vyimka. And we see that Ukrainians, there is no like, we can't say that there is already a final grand battle for Seversk. Everybody is preparing themselves, they're heavy shelling, regrouping, and so on. We suppose that the Russian might complete some Seversk operation by this evening, but it hasn't happened. So the Ukrainians moved here the most trained forces, according to the information from internet. I'm not saying that they're the most. And so this zero front line was protected by the 1st Assault Company Ukraine Volunteer Corps and with the 118th Territorial Defense Brigade, which was, as far as I understand, already defeated, and they were forced to leave Sporne. Now let's talk about two other important directions, is Verkhnyokamyanska and Serebryanka-Grigorievka. If we take a look at the Russian source map, we see that both two towns, Grigorievka and Verkhnyokamyanska, is already in the gray zone, and the Russians are pushing heavily in this direction, trying to reduce as much as possible Ukrainians on this area. If we take a look at this map, we see that, for example, Verkhnyokamyanska is protected by Belarusian forces. The forces that from this country on the north, this one, Belarus, it's the people who left Belarus during the 2020s, who is against the official authority in Belarus. By the way, there was a lot of news, a lot of updates about the situation in Lysychansk. A few Belarusian soldiers were captured in this area. They were moved towards the special forces in Lysychansk. Of course, there were investigations against them, and I think something tells me that in the near future these guys will be transferred to Belarus, and if they are terrorists according to Belarusian legislation, I think that these guys might got some death penalties. So we'll see and we'll follow the situation. So we see that Verkhnyokamyanska is protected by Kalinovsky battalion, Kalinovsky regiment. It's Belarus national-based forces, and they're in Verkhnyokamyanska. If you're talking about the forces in Grigorievka and Serebryanka, they're protected by Free Russian Regiment. So it's like the same situation as with forces from Belarus. It's like the forces against the official Belarus authorities. The same forces protects the area from Grigorievka towards Serebryanka. It's the forces that again it's Russia National Battalion forces who is against the official Russian authorities. So as we can see, this part of Ukraine, this zero front line, mostly protected by volunteers. And to tell the truth, I'm not sure that it's a very good idea. Of course, these guys are very motivated. These guys are very trained, well equipped, because, for example, if the Russian forces and Belarusian forces opposite to the official authorities forces, I think that they're well equipped because they're equipped from the West countries, from the people who are living in the West, Russians and Belarusians, of course. And this one, the Ukrainian Volunteer Corps, is also well supported. So it's from this side, it's very good because it's a very heavy, nice equipped forces. But from the other hand, these guys are not fighting for their own land. At least the forces from Russians and Belarusians. So to tell the truth, I'm not sure that these guys are going to stand till the last Ukrainian, because they're not Ukrainians. So we'll see. I think that this is the negative part, because the most important front line is protected by the forces that has no connection to the Ukraine. But from perspective of equipment and from perspective of their trainings, of course, they're very professional. Very professional. The only exception is the territorial defense on the south from Sporne near Berestova that has already been defeated. Now let's talk about Siversk. As you can see, the Siversk has enforced with two motorized brigade. So this one that located in Nikiforovka and another one that located in Kuzminovka, Kirova, in this area. The titles of towns a little bit differs from the West sources map, which we used to use in our videos, in our analysis. So we can say that it's like Zvanyevka, Kuzminovka. In this area, the Ukrainians have their motorized forces. This one. So that's mean it also confirms our projection that this line is the most important. And this line from Kuzminovka towards Sporne is enforced with the most powerful, motorized, most equipped brigade. So the Ukrainians do really expect the Russians in this area, and the Russians are moving in this area as the Ukrainians expect them. Another motorized brigade is around near Nikiforovka. This one, Nikiforovka. This one. It's also nice position because using these forces in Nikiforovka, you are able to support forces that located in Kriva Luka, in Solidar. From this area you can go move to Solidar. From this area you can move to Seversk. So it's something like reinforcement. It's like backup. In case if everything goes bad, the Ukrainians are able to send some reinforcement to any direction. Because it's motorized, they are able to move fast, and they're able to send them to Slaviansk, to Artyomovsk, and to Seversk. So it's something like their reinforcement. Now I have a very important question. If we take a look north of this area, like on the west from Seversk, I'm talking about the area from Dronovka, Platonovka, Kriva Luka, and in Zakitne. This area, according to this map, I'm not sure like for 100% that this information is correct, because maybe there are some changes and so on, but this area is protected by 79th Air Assault Brigade from Nikolaev area. So this entire coast is protected by this 79th Brigade. It's okay, no problem, but there is one important if, or important but. Let's say, you remember that in my previous video, I told you that this line of attack is very important. On the north is very important. The battle of Siversk is more important. But one of my important projection was that the most important and the most dangerous place where the Russians are planning and might use for their offensive operation is to cross the river near Zakitne, near Platonovka, Dronovka, to establish some bridgehead on this side of Severodonetsk river, and after that they are able to attack few towns like Kaleniki and to attack Siversk from the back. This is the most dangerous place that Ukrainians should pay attention to. And now I understand that Ukrainian military authorities are not following my channel, because if they follow, they would know about this situation. Why I'm saying this? Because today we got a very important report from the Russian Military of Defense, and usually they report about the Ukrainian losses, about their achievements, and what did they manage to do during the day, the previous day, about the loss from Ukrainian side. And today there was a report, and according to this report, there was two important notes. The first one, that there is 24th Mechanized Brigade from Ukrainian side, and they lost around 2,500 soldiers. It's their losses in this 24th Mechanized Brigade, and it's around 60% from their number of their forces. So we can say that this 24th Mechanized Brigade was reduced on 60%, 60%. That's a lot, that's really a lot. And now let's move next. And another thing that the Russian Ministry of Defense reported, that 79 Brigade has losses around 80%. So as you can see, according to this map, the Ukrainians, of course, according to their understanding of the situation, they did totally correct. This one, 79 Brigade, in the past, this brigade was on the zero line, as we discussed a few minutes ago. What does mean zero line? They were reduced heavily, and they decided to move their forces to more reliable positions, to give them some rest, to regroup, to reinforce this area forces, to make them 100% ready for the further defense operation or something like this. So, and that's why the Ukrainians decided to push to move these forces on this area. So now I understand that this 79th Brigade, according to this map, it's like Rezninovka, this town. So we can say that this 79th Brigade is located somewhere there, somewhere here. So I understand that the most valuable part of the front line is protected by the most ruined and reduced forces. For me, it's crazy. It's crazy news, because I didn't expect that it might happen, that something like this might happen. Yes, we see that the Ukrainians still have some mechanized brigade, and they can send this mechanized brigade to reinforce these forces near Kriva Luka, Platonovka. But as we discussed in previous videos, if the Russians are able to cross this river, the first thing they will do is they will establish fire control over the roads. And the forces, mechanized brigades that located in Nikiforovka, might be reduced heavily just by moving towards like this position in Roznivka to reinforce the 79 Assault Brigade. So for me, there are much more questions than the answers about the situation on the north from Seversk to Krivoluki towards Slaviansk in this area. So I see that it's the real focal point and the weakest point in Ukrainians' defense in this area. Okay, now we discussed like the north. We see that this north is really reinforced with professional, but they have some weak sides. And as you can see, there is like 3 lines. The first line, zero line, Seversk line, with like mechanized, motorized brigades. If we're talking about this town, it's like enforced with mountain assault brigade. And in the very, very back of all these lines, first line, second line, and the third line, there is a national battalion. Or it's not national battalion, it's foreign legion. So as you can see, the foreign legion is in the very, very back of every forces. And as I understand, according to this map, according to this disposition of forces, I see that this foreign legion, at least for now, they're doing some kind of job like anti-retreat forces, because they're in the very back and they're like on the cross of every roads, of every way for evacuation. And as I see, their main idea, at least at this part, at this battle, to stop and not to give Ukrainians any possibility to retreat. So they're like anti-retreat forces according to this disposition of forces on this map. Because if there were somewhere on the front, it would be another story. But they're in the back, so I see it like this. And furthermore, the same situation with this Donbas battalion. As you can see, this battalion is also located like in the very back. And as I see, they're also doing some job of anti-retreat forces. So they try to keep the Ukrainians to fight on the front lines and to force them to stand there and to try with any kind of possibility they have to stop the Russians. Now let's discuss Slaviansk. Slaviansk is just the troops. There is no, according to this map, there is no motorized or mechanized brigade. I'm sure that there are some tanks. In every brigade should have something like this, like tanks, heavy equipment, heavy vehicles and so on. But it's not the major forces in this region. So, and we can understand this because of few things. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, it shows us the terrain better. There is just forest, one forest, shared forest, another shared forest, as the Russians call this forest in there, among them. So that's why the Ukrainians are trying to use there just the troops, regular troops, who are able to control and to fix these areas. So if we're talking about the number of forces, I don't see that the Ukrainians do really expect some offensive operation from the Russians in this direction. Now let's move towards Bakhmut. If we take a look at Bakhmut or Artyomovsk, you see that there are also not much forces here. The only things that we should mention is the tank brigade. It's the only tank brigade in this area, and this tank brigade is located between Bakhmut and Solidar. If we take a look at the West Sources map, the Ukrainians established their tank brigade in this area. So it's like their base, and it's like in the middle, also in the middle of everything. And this tank brigade are able to stop any offensive operation from Bakhmut. So if you remember, I told you that the Ukrainians, the Russians, are not going to attack Bakhmut in front. For many reasons. I told you they will try to encircle it from the south. And one of the reasons, of course, is this town is enforced with the tank brigade. And if the Russians just try to attack Bakhmut in front, these tank brigade are able to attack like from Krasnogora towards here, and like I think that they will ruin everything on their way. So that's why the attack in front of Bakhmut is a very bad idea. This tank brigade, of course, solves a lot of problems. We can say that, yes, Artyomovsk Solidark is the fortress, and it's a very tough nut. And this fortress is also enforced with Defense Brigade 114th that located in Solidar. It's like on the zero line, and the Bakhmut and this tank brigade is not on the zero. And now let's talk about the south. As you can see, south is also have some forces, the Ukrainians. First of all, it's mechanized brigade in the cauldron. As you can see, Dolomitna is under the Russians on this map. If we take a look about the West Sources map, Dolomitna is still under the Ukrainians. So we can say that Ugledarskaya power plant, Semigorye, Kadema, this area is under mechanized brigade. 13th Mechanized Brigade. So that's why they're there. They have possibility, still have possibility to retreat and to run away from this area. If we're talking about Zaitsevo Vershina, these forces are just mountain battalion who is located in these small towns. So I don't think that's a very big problem for the Russians. But also these mountain battalions is reinforced and can be supported by mechanized brigade located in Uglidarska power plant. The only one question I have about the situation that I don't see any artillery. If you take a look at this situation, there are no artillery at all. Of course, every single brigade has some groups, some small groups with artillery. Just every single group should have this. Like if we're talking about tactical battalion group, but if we're talking about the real battalion, like artillery forces, I don't see it here. I can, if I was walking through this front line and I saw just a real artillery brigade just on the south, on the line from Orekhov towards Gulay Polye. And if you take a look at the West Sources map, if you remember, we always can see some rockets icons on this area showing us that there is like artillery duels in this sector. The same situation with Kherson. So let's take a look at this map one more time. There are not much forces from the Ukrainian side. The only thing that there is some battalions, national battalions like Azov. They have recreated this battalion. If you remember, this battalion was destroyed in Mariupol, but the Ukrainians decided to reincarnate their national hero battalion, so they say. And this battalion is fighting and standing in the area between Orekhov and Gulay Polye. About Donetsk, as you can see, Donetsk is under very heavy pressure. You see that Donetsk is very shelled, and if you take a look at this map, you see that Donetsk is encircled by one mechanized brigade, the second mechanized brigade, the third mechanized brigade. Also, there is like defense brigade. So as you can see, and all this front line is supported from intelligence battalion, the forces who are doing their intelligence job. And as you can see, if we're talking about the Ukrainians, of course they're doing their job well, because this front line from Avdiivka, this one Uglidar, is the most strongest, I can say. Also, this area is enforced with tank group on the south near Zaporozhye. And now let's discuss Kherson. As you can see, there are a lot of forces in Kherson district, and also this district is enforced with motorized brigade, mechanized brigade, artillery brigade, and so this another artillery brigade. So we see that the Ukrainians, they're doing their job well on this front line, trying to enforce this area as much as possible. And the only thing they need is to decide, are they going to just defend themselves, or maybe they're preparing for offensive operation. But if we're talking about the number of different types of forces in this area, I see that the Ukrainians are playing offensive operation. And again, we see another situation with this, with Ukrainian Volunteer Army. It's like the right sector, as far as I remember its title. So as you can see, they're also behind, and as I see, they're also doing some anti-retreat job in this area. So as you can see, the only place where we see like the national battalion in the front is just Azov, who is like Orekhov, Gulay Polye, and these battalions are protected. They are protecting artillery, and so this is the only forces that in front. And any other front line, we see that national battalions is in the back, doing some anti-retreat job. And the situation near Harkiv, there are also some mechanized forces in this area. But the same picture, very enforced artillery brigade I see in this area. So this is, we can say that the Harkiv is the self-unit that has everything they need. They have artillery, mechanized, motorized. They have some, we can say, special forces department, because there are a lot of commandos and a lot of battles in the forest, as we discussed. That they like scouts and commandos force fightings in this area. So that's why the Ukrainians do have some special forces like Kraken in this area, like special forces detachment, also some defense brigade. So we see the forces location, and we see that Ukrainians are waiting for the Russians' offensive operation in this area. And I'm sure that in a day or in two we're going to see something. For now, the Russians are just trying to reduce the Ukrainians as much as possible using artillery, but sooner or later we're going to see the real steps. And One more time, this configuration tells me that maybe I just want to believe in my own projection, because like it's my own projection about what can I say, but I see that something tells me that the Russians will try to develop their offensive operation in the south, because this tank brigade between two towns, I'm not sure that's a very good idea, or if the Russians maybe are able to reduce them. And about Siversk, it's not the question about the forces, it's the vital area, and no matter how much forces Ukrainians have here, anyway, the Russians need to push and to reduce Ukrainians in this area as much as possible. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes. Military Summary channel reminds you that we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Join my Patreon and have a good day. Bye bye.